Latina show.
Hosted by IDM.
And we are live everywhere, including on Instagram. Hello, Nina. Как дела?
Welcome to another installment of the most popular show in the world, the Winter Latina Show. And before I get started, because we're going to be discussing Belarus today, which is actually it's difficult to find some pertinent information about it in English, which is, I think, helpful for us to talk about it. We're also going to talk a little bit about Belarusian and Russian relations. So for that reason, I have an inside joke, which is not an inside joke if I tell you what it is, but look what I have. It says, I love Moscow. This is my little Adidas tracksuit squatting Slavs, and there's a picture of Moscow right here. I probably would get punched if I were to go out in certain parts of North America dressed like this. But, here in this digital environment of global citizenry, I can do whatever I want within the legal parameters and the social media parameters, of course, of each of the relevant networks. So yes, this is sort of one of these squatting Slav episodes. And the reason we decided to talk about Belarus kind of as this starting off point, is because Belarus just had elections. There were parliamentary elections, the status quo prevailed, and elections may sound kind of boring, but I think it's really interesting to think about Belarus in the context of it being, let's pull a Putin. We don't have to go all the way back to 1,000 years ago in terms of history, but there's also that shared history between Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and yes,
it's always more interesting when we go 1,000 years back.
Yes, I'm gonna pull out my non-existent folder here and talk about that. But there are also many other parallels that go back to, let's say, the 1700s, where for a while parts of Ukraine were controlled by Poland, right? Similarly, parts of Belarus were controlled by Poland. Then Poland was partitioned by. It had two partitions, right? When it was initially partitioned, parts of Belarus went sort of back to the Russian Empire. So there's also that kind of political going back and forth going on beyond this, the sort of common shared roots and the similarity of cultures. And then, of course, in the 20th century, we had the rise of this sort of extreme ethno-nationalism around World War I and in World War II again. So there is that parallel to Ukraine. So we kind of wanted to see why Ukraine turned into what it did, whereas Belarus didn't. And is it just a matter of, having a powerful, as something like the BBC likes to call him, the last dictator of Europe, right? Lukashenko at the helm of the country, or is there something else going on? Why did this happen to one country? Is Belarus less important? So, like I said, I was trying to find some of these more specific articles in English to send to Marcelo about that sort of extreme ethno-nationalism, and it's actually really difficult. I had to send him a bunch of links that he had to basically auto-translate because it simply doesn't exist. I'm actually thinking of maybe writing up a little piece of my own using this, this show as a jumping off point to kind of provide a little bit more context in written format beyond this conversation. So does that make sense?
That would be a good idea, and please send me the link if you do so I can add to this video somewhere in the future.
5 months from now when I write this art, no, I'm just kidding. I'm actually going to try to get on it because it's fresh in my mind. I'm just going to, instead of getting my usual 4 hours of sleep, it's going to be 2, but I'll finish it. So we'll do it.
Exactly. So yeah, you sent me 2 articles in Russian, so I had to use the Google translator to translate.
And they had a lot of slang in them, so I don't even know how well the slang translated. So not slang, but kind of like the nomenclature that they would use to describe these nationalists, right? So
exactly, specific language. So first of all, the first article that you sent to me was, it kind of confused my head, because it looked like the people that were persecuted were Russophiles, and maybe I understood wrong, okay? So it can be a translation problem. And then they were persecuted in Bielorusia, in Belarus, sorry, thinking in Portuguese every now and then. And so they seemed like they were Russophiles, they were pro-Russia movement, or maybe a pro-Russian disguise movement. So as far as I understood, that was the point, and that was what confused my mind, because
there was a moment in the second decade of the current century, right? So 2017, 2018, where there was this sort of rise of extreme ethno-nationalism in Belarus, and there were definite connections. If you go back to historical articles, right, from 6 years ago, you'll look them up, you'll see there are pictures of people wrapping themselves in very specific Belarusian flags, like nationalistic flags of a particular history, and Ukraine. So this is, before the special military operation launched. So there's that connection. But there's also an important feature that I think kind of is not really mentioned much, and that's the fact that Lukashenko really toyed with these extreme ethno-nationalists at that time, where some people tried to describe his politics as multi-vector, where he kind of tried to show Russia that, I can cooperate with Europe, and then at the same time he was cooperating with Russia, but it was kind of like not as this general cooperation framework, but kind of like at the expense of one or the other. And as part of that, he was really kind of excessively being too nice to these people. So for instance, his government would allow them, instead of letting them follow sort of the standard procedures for registering some kind of a demonstration or in a public event, right? That in many countries you're supposed to register with the police or whatever the local laws are like, right? And so instead of having them do that, they would get like a large public area for free without having to sort of register or pay for it. So there are all these perks that were being showered upon these nationalists, and then this sort of toying with nationalists kind of turned against him in the context of the protests that took place in 2020. And so you kind of have this tension between these more Western liberals in the Belarusian context, and much like what you had with Euromaidan, right, in 2013, 2014 in Ukraine. You had the extreme ethno-nationalists with sketchy collaborationist idols from World War II, also some from sort of the World War I period. Much the same happened in Belarus, right? There was that parallel. You had the Belarusian ethno-nationalists that, of course, were kind of supporting Ukraine in that context, and at the same time you had the pro-Western liberals that were trying to topple Lukashenko. So you had those two sort of sides essentially in this kind of a dog breakfast. I don't want to call it an alliance. It was more like an alliance of convenience as far as these protests were concerned. But they were pretty major, right? In 2020, they took place for several months. So there was that parallel between Ukraine and Belarus. And of course, in Belarus, it happened, 6 years later. And there were some serious attempts at toppling sort of the status quo. To me, Lukashenko, yes, has been in power for a long time, but to me, he represents the status quo in Belarus. It doesn't matter if it's Lukashenko or someone else like him, because he sort of represents, in my opinion, the will of the people, whether the people are sort of supporting that government because they know that much, much, much worse can happen, having seen the example of Ukraine, or whether they genuinely, like this leader and this is their expression of democracy, is a separate question. And of course, as a little side note, we can look at so-called democratic states in the official West, and we can say, well, the government changes every X number of years, right? Mm-hmm. This parliament changes every 4 years, that parliament, that president changes every however many years, but nothing really changes fundamentally in that system. So then the question is, what is the point of changing government? Yes, you can say, yes, maybe it eliminates corruption or minimizes it as of a particular individual or a group of individuals. But at the same time, when the system really doesn't change much, even if it needs to be changed, then the question, and then of course the sort of the general population is really not supporting them, and the turnouts for these elections are like 20%. What does that say about the status of democracy, right? You can sort of criticize Lukashenko for being in power as this classic dictator, right? And without kind of looking at this other side where you have low turnouts, where nothing fundamentally changes. There might be some cosmetic thing of like, oh, well, like decrease this tax by 1%, or we'll increase this tax by, 0.5%, but nothing really changes. So, is this a testament to how stable the system is, or is this a testament to the fact that democracy as it is defined doesn't really work in the way that it's meant to work? It doesn't actually express the will of the people when the people are, very much dissatisfied. And then, of course, specific to the EU, you have all these unelected officials like our friend gynecologist Ursula, and that's a whole different question. So I think sometimes what people call whataboutism is actually quite relevant, because it's about, seeing issues with your own situation before going to criticize someone else. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious. You live in Europe. You obviously through it. You probably, to a certain extent avoid the Western media, alternative sources, but you still have that filter of European news. So what is the perception of Belarus? Is this kind of like this unimportant country that's just attached to Russia? Is it just this whole like last dictator of Europe trope? What is the perception there on the ground, Marcelo?
Yeah, on the ground.
On the ground.
Well, again, I have to say that myself, so before 2022, I was not paying too much attention about news. Things were stable, and stability makes us lazy. That's the rule number one. And so I never saw too much talk about Belarus or Belarus. Never saw too much talk about it. It's been raising a little bit, when you receive Android pop-ups of news and stuff like that, it has raised a little bit. So very interestingly, some weeks ago, there was a video going around in the interwebs, in Twitter, of an interview with Lukashenko from I think a BBC, a British, at least a British guy.
Every couple of months we have to tweet memes from that interview, because he's very, very blunt and harsh in that interview. Yeah. And actually the English subtitles kind of exaggerate. I mean, they're not incorrect, but they kind of exaggerate his statements to sound even more harsh, which of course maybe to the sort of lukewarm mainstream last, men of Europe sounds really awful, but to people sort of on the other side of us is like, well, he's so badass. He's more badass than Putin. Look at what he can say, and Putin is so controlled, and he's so thought out, and he's so legalistic, and here's Lukashenko, who is like smashing his fist and being this like crazy uncle who really lets you know what he thinks. Yeah, so it's interesting that you've seen the same memes. And I would like, can you ask our viewers if they can hear us on Twitter?
Well, guys, if you can hear us on Twitter, I checked it. It's okay. It should be working. At least it's working on my, I'm going to put it here right now. Right. If you can hear us on Twitter, I checked it. It's okay.
Okay.
I just said that.
Interesting, because I'm just seeing one person saying it's unreliable, but I'm seeing another person saying it's working. So that's why it's a little bit confusing to me whether the technical aspect is fully functional. But I guess you can check as much as you can check. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I checked everywhere, so
Sure.
it should be working.
Okay.
And right now in Twitter, it shouldn't be a problem, and in the other ones, it's not a problem as well. So I also
Sure.
checked on your YouTube. What is it? On your YouTube. Yeah, I mean,
It's going. Interesting. Okay. I guess maybe some people are having a different experience with it, and it's a little bit all over
Turn
the
up
place.
the volume, guys. Turn up the volume.
Sure enough, put on your
Put on
earbuds.
your piece, yeah.
Yeah. So,
And-
like, again, I know you're sort of not in the mainstream. You're sort of well aware of alternative views, maybe without knowing a lot of this background information that's simply not in English. But when you see these little memes and blurbs from that, infamous BBC interview with Uncle Sasha, with crazy Uncle Sasha that we all love, who likes to smash his fist into the table, what is your impression?
So, I would say as a Brazilian, because I don't know the impression in Europe about that. So, as a Brazilian, that's the kind of thing that Brazilians like, a good gossip,
Yes,
something like that. I myself, I have, as you said, I prefer the impression when I listen to Putin, to the Putin. But I have to say that the things that he says sounds very sane. Okay, so that's my first impression. So things like, I don't care what British people think about elections here or what I do about my country. I don't do it for British people. I do it for Belarus people. So this is very sane. This should be obvious. This should be the first obvious thing to point out.
Well, because the BBC interviewer obviously implicitly or not so implicitly considers himself superior in sort of this, Western civilization garden, as opposed to, little Belarus, the little potato producing Belarus, right? So in that sense, he probably legitimately thinks that people in Belarus should care about the perception on some UK island. He probably actually thinks this. And yes, I think what Lukashenko says is very sane. It's actually interesting as far as that goes. If you look at sort of the history of Belarusian elections in the second decade of our century, of the 21st century. So I guess it must have been the 2015 elections. He did allow foreign observers from multiple countries. In a show of faith, he did release a bunch of people that have been described as political prisoners, but nothing really changed. So I think he also had this experience of, well, what is the point of, doing everything and doing what they want when the reaction is exactly the same? They're going to say that we're falsifying elections, et cetera, et cetera. What is the point for me to even do that when I tried it? When they're calling me the same thing, when they're insulting me and painting me in a particular light, and our country is not really getting much out of this. So I think he also had that experience. So
exactly. So if you get, for example, very famous video of CNN, I guess, or MSNBC, whatever, these American outlets that you can grab whatever they're talking about. When you see the Crimea, for example, the Crimea separation election, the what's it called, the popular voting.
Referendum. Yeah, the referendum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you get, there's this reporter just watching the count of the votes, and in the end, it was something like 98% or something like that. And the reporter, with a banana face, just looking at the camera, well, they kind of voted for separating, but what?
And if you look at their track record, right, they always leave out the part there. Crimea has had multiple attempts to hold these referenda in which the statistics were similar. So there's this long track record that is usually ignored.
Matter, because at that point he already told the public that this is being stolen. So it doesn't matter what's the past. It doesn't matter what's going to be for the future. The important thing is that, that was stolen, because he thinks, because he has no proof, he was there. I mean, it's not someone that like me from here, from Italy, just saying, well, it was a sham. No, he
Right.
was there, and he was disappointed because because it didn't happen
This
what
challenged
he
my
wanted.
view. I'm disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, people are going to know the truth. Oh, scheiße, what am I
Uncle
going to
Sasha's
do?
propaganda is real, and Putin's propaganda is real too.
Exactly. So the guy has a point there. What is the point of bringing observers? You know, because when you get the list of observers, is always some NGO that is financed by some oligarch somewhere.
Right.
You know, if you get, I'm going to put some example as Nicaragua, for example. You have this Nicaragua. I give this example because it's a very small country, and you know, Central American, so it's not super economically relevant, and yet they have a million observers there. And
well, Nicaragua has a long history of being controlled by a certain hegemon in the region, so I think we know why Nicaragua would have this million observers, right?
No, the thing is that Nicaragua has a sovereign government, and Nicaragua has a foreign agent law. You know, like the FARA, the American FARA. So every time,
if you go back to the first 3 decades of the 20th century, you'll probably see why they have this kind of legislation. So
exactly, and we just recorded a program today about Rumble because Rumble pulled out of Brazil. We just me and Dave, so we recorded. It's going to come up, you know, next week or the next one. While I'll be having wine and port wine.
He's teasing us again. He's teasing us again. For those of us amidst the snow and ice and frozen and frostbitten darkness, he's going to be sitting on the beaches of Southern Europe and teasing us. And he just reminds us in every episode.
I say that just to say this. So, but in reality, we were talking about the FARA law in Brazil, and you know that every time some country tries to implement a FARA law, like Georgia happened recently, you know, just like that. Color revolution mode, you know, you have
which is hilarious because, I mean, not to point out the obvious, but all of these laws are based on the sort of the U.S. precedent of that particular law. So they're actually kind of following that type of instruction, and then they're being shut down because they're not allowed to have their own
because it happens exactly what the law is against.
Because that's what the law is about. Yeah, exactly. Which is pretty well. To me, the Georgia situation, I know it's a separate topic, was amazing because they kept calling it sort of, the Western media was trying to market it as Russian interference, which was like absolutely blowing my mind when this law had like zero to do with Russia. It was about their own internal issues. And again, the law was based on the sort of the American blueprint. So to call it Russian interference was just like, how do you even like attach that, you know, that concept here? But I guess they always try. Well, actually, speaking of attaching concepts, I wanted to see, you know, I wanted to go back, and I remember the sort of Twitter is, you know, Twitter/X as a platform to support of a lot of live information events as they develop, and sometimes it's not completely accurate. And so I remember those protests, right? And in 2020, I remember watching them. I remember the nationalist stuff in 2018. It seems like it just happened yesterday. It was, you know, 4 years ago. But I wanted to go back and see what the Western media coverage was like, although it's always very predictable, you know, all the same slogans about Lukashenko being a dictator, authoritarian, blah, blah. But there was just some stuff was just, again, also blowing my mind. So for instance, you know, this self-described, as you call her, the female Guaido, Svetlana, Soviet Svetlana. You know, how she is sort of this pro-West opposition with a typical NGO backing, you know, very, very standard format. But, you know, and now she has an opposition government, which just, again, also blows my mind, operating from, I think, like Poland and the Baltic. And on social media and the news, they and she refer to themselves as the leader of Belarus. So apparently, like, I can go on Twitter and call myself the Empress of Eurasia, and who's going to stop me, right? I'm
wait.
I'm the Empress of Eurasia in exile.
Are you telling me that you cannot be whatever you want?
Well,
I don't think the United States
yeah.
is against that. You
Yeah,
can just call yourself whatever.
I know I self-identify as the Empress of Eurasia in exile, so yeah, I can call myself whatever I want. Yeah, that's a separate issue where you can just kind of go in public and declare yourself whatever, and if it fits particular narratives in, here in the official West, they're just gonna kind of reiterate them and propagate them, and it just sounds insane. But anyway, the interesting thing was that this was a BBC article after the protests, after that election, and the election was stolen, blah, 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 all the same kind of tropes. But there was like a line there that said that Lukashenko allowed her to run because he doesn't take women seriously and he doesn't think women can be elected. But there was no follow-up on that. There was no like, because here and here he showed himself to be a misogynist, or, oh, look what he says here and here. It was just this random, by the way, he hates women, but we're just going to move on to this other thing. And, he's like an older man. He was born in 1954. Maybe he is very sort of traditional, right, roles within society, men, women, although he's a Soviet person. So it's kind of hard for me to see that going too far, the way you would have sort of more conservative countries without that egalitarian Soviet experience. But let's say that's true. Why don't you give me this evidence? Why are you just randomly throwing out this thing where he's a misogynist and you don't take women seriously, women in government? You just kind of like randomly mention this and then as the slur, and then you move on to something else. And this was the BBC, right? And this was actually a Russian language article on the BBC. I'm not sure if it was a translation or specifically made for the Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian audience that would be reading this in Russian. But that's just like one example of the type of stuff that you would see without any kind of filter. It's just there. Yeah, so it's just kind of remarkable.
Yeah, but mentioning the Western media, well, while I was just, searching around for the elections, the first Google result for this is this Euronews. We all know what Euronews is. I don't have to explain. Everybody that follows our channel knows. Belarus elections were a sham, US says, as results are announced. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter the content, just because 110 seats were basically won by the Lukashenko party, I guess.
Well, by the status quo. Again, to me, I would view this as a sort of reiteration of the status quo. I mean, people might be unhappy about particular features of their country. Like, it's very normal to see what's in front of you and say, I want this better. I want the potholes to be gone, right? I want, maybe more serious issues as well. But people, especially now, they see what's happened in Ukraine. Like, what else are they going to want? They're going to, reinstate the status quo, whether Lukashenko is this amazing ruler or whether he's just a representation of things that are okay or things that are good, So yeah, it's exactly that. When you see that headline, it's almost like, why should I even bother, clicking on it? You're telling me exactly what you think. You're telling me exactly what I should think, and yeah, it's not even worth it.
Just like in the words of Lavrov, just write whatever. It doesn't matter my answer. You're gonna write whatever you want anyway.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of proof. Well, it's a sham. Why it's a sham? Because the guy won, or his party won more than the others. Well, maybe they are doing kind of a good work. It doesn't matter if it's not good for you. It looks like the people find it good. We always say this in our channel. People that will be watching this from Nina's channels. In Brazil, the first elections of Lula, he had like 80-something% of approval, and we already had the digital voting back at the time, because then it became a thing that, oh no, this is not trustworthy, right. So it has to be digital, and then it has to print your vote, so to be so there was, just like the United States. So it's been stolen. But Lula, in his first two mandates, the first and the second one, he had 80-something% approval of the country. It was not like Biden, Trump, like 50 something, 51 against 49,
Right.
or even the last election in Brazil against Bolsonaro.
Much
That
closer,
was
right.
yeah, and even almost the new, so you can null your vote in Brazil, and you can abstain. Okay, so it's obligatory. The voting is obligatory, but you can abstain. You can just not go, and then you pay a fine, like I don't know, 50 cents of dollars, something like that. And so you have two options. You can vote blank, or you can null. And I don't know the difference. Both of them, it's invalid voting, but I don't know the difference that it makes.
Well, I get the gist, though. I think it's a technical difference that, in the grand scheme of things, means that you're essentially, foregoing your voice, right? Your vote.
Yeah, but the thing was that basically, if you sum the nulls, the blank, and the abstentions, it was almost 30%. So you would have, 1/3.
Right, 1/3 of the population.
1/3 here, 1/3 there.
Yeah, which is actually kind of like, that's what you see in a lot of these, right, European elections. It's always like a very small showing, and then people just simply do not show up. And that shows you just how much they care, or they're just apathetic because they're not really seeing the changes that, that they desire. So what's even the point if I'm constantly trying to invest all this effort and then nothing happens, right? So.
Yeah. So coming back to the aspects of that news that you sent me, was my perspective wrong? So there was this pro-Russian group, then they became pro-Belarusian, and then they kind of was lost in between that.
I sent you two articles. I'm not sure which of the two articles. I'm not sure which one of the two you're referring to, but basically. There was an interesting article by a man that considers himself sort of in opposition to Lukashenko. And and he basically begrudgingly admitted that Lukashenko was more reasonable and democratic towards people like him who are in opposition to him than these extreme ethno-nationalists, which is exactly the experience you have in Ukraine, where these, extreme ethno-nationalists just seem to just despise everyone else, and they really just want to drive their point home, and they really just don't care about any kind of nuance, linguistic, cultural, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought it was really interesting that this man who, I believe he was writing from Russia, so he wasn't in Belarus, and he claimed to have suffered, again, I don't know much about this particular journalist or who he is. I just thought that idea that he claims to be in opposition to Lukashenko. He doesn't like him, and then he has to admit that, he's actually more democratic than people give him credit for, in contrast to these insane ethno-nationalists who wouldn't allow any kind of showing of, Russian language and culture, et cetera, et cetera. And, just thinking about the Ukrainian context with sort of that escalation, which, again, it didn't start in 2022, it didn't start in 2014, it started after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It was just more gradual in terms of, instead of federalizing and allowing people with different languages and, cultural backgrounds, especially in, let's say majority Russian speaking areas, to, maintain those roots, there was that sort of imposition of a minority identity from Western Ukraine onto everyone else. And then, of course, it escalated towards the, 2014 Maidan, that regime change. And, it was completely on steroids around 2022 and up until today. So I thought that was very interesting. And as far as these nationalists are concerned, again, it just always blows my mind that these people who are sort of seeking an alternative historical model, they're going back to a time that's either embarrassing for them or just awful, like with the, some of these Ukrainian ethno-nationalists going back to World War II collaboration with, Nazi Germany, which is like, can you not find anything else outside of this? That would be a little bit more reasonable. In Belarus, there was also collaboration because, remember, Operation Barbarossa overran western parts of the Soviet Union first, right? So that would have been Belarus and Ukraine. So they're all under occupation. And so, yes, there was kind of similar collaboration in Belarus. If you were to go and just look up the historical photos, even their uniforms look similar to the Ukrainian counterpart, the UPA, which was, one of those collaborationist forces in that land. So that's really interesting. But specifically, these nationalists actually like to go back to not the Third German Reich, but the Second German Reich as the sort of the founding of their republic, which never actually existed. Again, it's just like it didn't exist. But if you go back to World War I and to the Russian Revolution of 1917, we're going to pull up Putin, which of course I call Pulinina because that's what I do. And if you go back to that period, you have to remember that the Bolsheviks were sort of this a minority, right? They were trying to, after the revolution was successful, they had to regain control over an entire country. And they were fighting not just sort of the white movement, the pro-Tsar movement, or the anti-Bolshevik movement, or people who were apolitical but didn't like the Bolsheviks. They're also fighting the Western intervention, which is, of course, an invasion, right? From Britain, from France, from Japan, from the US, et cetera, et cetera. There was like the French were in Ukraine, the British were there too, Crimea, Odessa, southern sort of modern day Ukraine. The British were in the northwest in Murmansk. The Americans and the Japanese were in the northeast. So they're just occupying, trying to occupy parts of Russia, loot the natural resources, and also instill control under the guise of we're stopping the spread of communism while getting the sort of very personal goals, right, that had nothing to do with any kind of ideological questions. And so the Bolsheviks kind of had to contend with this absolute chaos that in part was, it's kind of hard to say their fault because there were many long-term causes of the revolution that sort of predated the Bolsheviks. But of course, they're the ones that sort of finally overthrew the provisional government, so they were in charge. And so they were fighting, and of course World War I was still raging on. So they were fighting the Germans, they're fighting the whites, they're fighting all these other former allies that like vultures descended on the scattered ashes of the Russian Empire. And so Lenin had to make a really difficult choice. He signed the Brest-Litovsk agreement in 1919. And remember, this is actually in Belarus, right? Brest is in Belarus. And as part of that, to not at least have to fight the Germans, right, the second German Reich, he gave up a lot of land. And that land was parts of Ukraine, parts of Belarus. So at that time in 1918, the Second Reich was occupying Belarus too, not just Ukraine. And Ukraine had its own pseudo-government. I think we talked a little bit about this before. I've certainly written about it too. It's very short-lived. And so did Belarus, right? They had this self-proclaimed republic, but not only was it not recognized internationally, you can say, well, it's sort of like engaging in the state building, but it wasn't recognized by the Germans. Why would the Germans give them any kind of autonomy, right, when they wanted to control this land too? So I think the most that the Germans gave them was some kind of cultural things that they can do, very sort of benign and politically unimportant. Oh, and they're allowed to issue their own stamps, when stamps are very important too.
Yeah, so very important. Yeah,
so they had their own, they had their own stamps, they had their own flag, and they were able to do sort of small things as far as culture is concerned. And then, of course, remember obviously Germany lost World War I, and the rest is history. So that republic, that wasn't even a republic, didn't last, nor was it fully formed, but these ethno-nationalists like to go back and look at that time as sort of the founding of their independent state. And so again, there's that interesting parallel to Ukraine of looking to a time under occupation of another power like Germany, actually, in both cases, where that power had no interest in having them be independent in any shape or form. It was about the extraction of resources, it was about the control of the land. And they're looking at it at this, this glorious time that they had independence, which of course they didn't. So this is why, right, this happened in 1918. This is why there are all these big nationalist, ethno-nationalist marches and protests in Belarus in 2018, right? That was the 100th anniversary of this republic. And and at that time, Lukashenko was still kind of flirting with these ethno-nationalists because he was trying to sort of to sit on 2 chairs, maybe even 3 chairs, right? I'm going to be cooperating with Europe. I'm going to be cooperating with Russia. Sometimes I'm going to be playing them off each other to sort of gain the greatest benefit for me, but that doesn't always work out, right? When it's the bigger, more powerful entities that you're trying to play off of each other. And at the same time, I'm going to play nice with these nationalists by allowing them to basically run amok and do whatever they want. And then, of course, they started turning on him. And if you think about the role of these extreme ethno-nationalists in the Ukrainian scenario, they were sort of like the boots on the ground, the enforcers of this nice rainbow kittens and puppies Euromaidan and, your beautiful rainbow path towards the European Union, right? So you had these nice pro-Western liberals in Ukraine, but then on the ground you had these insane ethno-nationalists, right? That if you're not going to do what we say, we're going to kick your ass in the best case scenario, or we might do much, much, much worse, right? And so there's been many analysts think that the reason certain, like the previous president Poroshenko and even Zelensky haven't been able to do certain things because there's this threat from these extreme nationalists that kind of have that have had a carte blanche since that initial pseudo revolution, right, the regime change. And so in the Belarusian scenario, this would have been a similar situation where you have these insane ethno-nationalists that would have been the boots on the ground, the enforcers, and people sort of in this uncomfortable union with these pro-Western liberals that are backed by all these NGOs and so on and so forth, kind of like this marriage of convenience, much like in the Ukrainian scenario. And if you look at these so-called volunteers, right, mercenaries that went to fight on the Kiev site, a lot of these Belarusian ethno-nationalists went to fight for, an extremist unit like Azov, right? And there's obviously some other ones too. So there's this direct connection. And so I think after a while, Lukashenko realized that, I have this absolute, pardon my French, shit show on my hands, and it's probably not working in my favor. And of course, there are all these rumors that in the 2020 protests that were quite serious, as part of that election, he stole the election, he falsified the results. The rumor is that essentially Putin swept in and saved him, right? He managed to stabilize the country behind the scenes. And now Lukashenko is sort of back to being this Slavic badass who is more anti-official West, and he's sort of working more with Russia. And, that may be true. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that Putin, the Russian government pulled some strings to prevent another bloodshed, another regime change on its borders that would have been of no benefit to Russia in any shape or form. And are you aware that Russia and Belarus actually have a union state? They're part of the union.
Well, I was about to ask that because that's very interesting. Very interestingly, when the SMO started the special military operation in Ukraine, when the amazing, by the way, your French is very good. When the amazing sanctions rose, they sanctioned Belarus. So why? Yes. I mean, that's the first question a normal human being would ask. Why? What? Isn't that Russia? So Russia, Belarus is the same country. What is that? So the fact is that they have a kind of same. They are kind of interconnected. They are not the same country, but they have the economy kind of connected. The political system kind of connected. I think we had Lucas Leroy's here explain briefly about that. Maybe you could.
Well, it's not so much the political system. There are certainly two separate political entities, right? There are two separate countries. a union state is about A, economic integration, B, military and intelligence integration. So, if it's true that Putin swept in and saved Lukashenko from being sort of swept in this, NGO-backed color revolution of 2020, 2021, right? I'm sure those intelligence mechanisms were being activated, right? Because they're much, much more integrated. Yeah, so it's more about having certain perks as far as mutual trade goes, right? Having sort of mutually beneficial conditions for that trade, and also that military and intelligence integration. But at the same time, they're two separate entities. So when people say, oh, it's just like the Soviet Union, it's actually not just like the Soviet Union. I don't think there is an interest to reinstate something like the Soviet Union for better or for worse, right? Some of us would say. So yeah, that's really interesting. Another interesting thing about Lukashenko, and I was actually not aware of that, and I haven't fact-checked this, but I think it had legitimate citation, is that in the early 90s, just before the Soviet Union dissolved, there was this vote, right, from people in highly positioned individuals in different Soviet republics, whether to keep or dissolve the Soviet Union. He was the only one, from what I understand, in sort of the high echelons of power in Belarus who voted against dissolving the Soviet Union. So I thought that was very interesting that he actually, well, first of all, he didn't go with the flow, right? He didn't actually just go with what everyone else was doing, that he actually wanted to maintain this political entity. So I think that shows that he does have backbone. And then in the 90s, he did try to have a certain level of cooperation, right, with the Yeltsin government. And he wanted to sort of, in this new environment where the Soviet Union was no longer around, he still wanted to have these close ties to Russia while being two separate states. And I think the one thing that also, yet another, not the one thing, the gazillion billion thing that doesn't get mentioned in the case of Belarus is that Belarus has actually really good relations with China. China is doing a lot of development in Belarus. Anytime I'm reading sort of the Russian language Chinese state media, and I'm not saying state media is this bad thing, I actually kind of like the more factual information that comes out of Chinese state media. I don't have to scroll through sham this or fake that. I can just get the literal, like, this is what happened on such and such day. So many.
At least they are honest with themselves.
Well, but it's just like, it literally, I don't want to know the ideological background. I just want to know who came, where did they go, what did they do, like the basic who, what, where, when, why. And then I can draw my own conclusions, right? I don't need you to tell me what to think. I just need to know the facts, and I don't want to filter through all this other stuff. So
Wait. You're telling me you're not supposed, are you saying you're not supposed to receive opinions, preconceived opinions?
I know, it's really shocking. That's
not journalism.
It's not journalism, it's very shocking. In today's day and age,
it's propaganda.
Right. So yeah. So I mean, I'm sometimes I look at Belarusian news in Russian. A lot of their news, Russian is the dominant language there, which is not to say that Belarusian isn't used. But yeah, and I sort of look at that too. There's a lot of Chinese development projects going on there too. It's part of sort of this. Obviously, the greater Chinese attempt to integrate Eurasia, right? Russia has its own attempts to integrate Eurasia through the Eurasian Economic Union. And then there's that other entity, the union state between Russia and Belarus. And, I don't want to say that this is never going to be an issue, but so far I'm not seeing anything from Russia that Russians would say, oh no, I can't believe China is there. I don't want them working with Belarus. We control it, right? So the fact that, the Chinese are doing whatever they need to do there, and then the Russians are doing whatever they need to do there, and then that actually, from what I could see, at least on the surface, it benefits the people of Belarus through all this new economic development that China has, helped sort of spur all around the world. I'm not really seeing that clash. So it's actually very interesting in terms of that Eurasian integration, how China plays into that. And we don't normally see that again in the English language media. I'm having to go to Russian language Chinese media or directly to Belarusian and Russian media to even find this information. It's not, it's not there. So it's kind of like you have to go through layers of, it's good to be multilingual.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so
good. We have translators as well today. So for the Brazilian public, or maybe even other publics that look at this video. So one thing that's very interesting, when Lucas Leroy came here, he had just came back the first time he had just came back from Belarus. Things that, it's a very typical Brazilian perception when we go to places. So what he said was that the streets were extremely clean. People were polite. You were not seeing bumps everywhere or people, homeless people or stuff like that. You had a decent money, so I think I don't know what's the money. There is also ruble, but different country.
Yes. It's not the Russian currency. But it's interesting that you mentioned that. Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned that because you can have state curated information where things are presented in a nicer way, and I think every government maybe does this to a certain extent, and they're as part of their soft power, right? Look at our beautiful cultural buildings, subways, etc. Fine, but there's also a lot of social media, and there's a lot of people posting their own content, and yes, it's certainly being curated to a certain extent too, but I have the same impression of Belarus. I've never been to Belarus, although I have I can claim a great grandmother who was from Belarus, so there's my connection, and she married actually my great, hopefully I named the right number of greats because it's far back, but he was from Georgia, but he went to a theological school in Kiev. So I also have that connection to Ukraine as well. That also shows you how the Russian Empire was sort of multicultural, very integrated in that sense. But yeah, I've never been to Belarus. I would love to go. I have had previously family members that lived there for a long time. I've never been, but from what I could see on social media, random people, it does look very clean. It does look very well taken care of. I mean, I can't speak to the reality on the ground, are there really poor people there, et cetera, et cetera. But from what I could see, it looks like a very decent place to live. So, it looks, again, from what I see, just very anecdotally, but I don't think it's irrelevant. It looks like a safe place to live too, right? So, that's kind of another parallel to, let's say, people feeling safe on the streets of Moscow versus not feeling safe in a large North American city and not being able to even go in very public places. When I lived in Toronto, Canada, and I would be out leaving work very late, I didn't necessarily feel safe in areas that should have been safe, that were very well lit, that had lots of people out. And I've had, many incidents where things were unsafe. So I kind of have that impression, and I haven't really, a place where I would feel safe would be, something like Tokyo. So to me, it's like East Asia from what I've seen, and perhaps, Moscow. And from what I can tell, I've never been, so I'm not sure. Minsk looks really nice, right? And obviously, it's not the only city in Belarus, but.
Yeah, no, it's very important point for us Brazilians because public safety is extremely important for Brazilians, especially because we don't have. So Davidson, for example, in the channel, he had mentioned a couple of times when he was in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, and he was in a hotel, and during the night he just decided to go, get a Coke somewhere or water. And he was walking in the street, and a car just stopped by him. Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you here? And, and he was
shocked,
kind of scared for his life to a level that maybe he was not even in
Brazil,
in Rio.
Right?
Yeah. And when he immediately went back to the hotel. The guys decided to let him be.
Leave him alive.
Yeah, and the guy from the work he was performing there said, "Dude, don't do that."
Yeah.
Do not
go outside after 9 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, people don't know your face. People don't know where you're from. You may get to and that's the kind of thing that I would say to someone to go to when he goes to Rio de Janeiro, at least. If you have a lot of people and you see that's just people walking around, it's okay. But late at night, be aware especially if you're an outsider and you look outsider to a Brazilian, you know, super white people with, usually they use the Hawaiian t-shirts. I don't know what's the deal with the Hawaiian t-shirts, by the way, but you know, you look gringo, so stay safe, you know, go to you know, grab a taxi, or especially a taxi that speaks English, which is also not very easy to find. But yeah, those are the things. Lucas also mentioned that, it looks very safe. And when we were talking also about China with Carl Zai and some other people, that Li Jingjing, for example, they also said, I have a friend living in Beijing, and the thing she told me was exactly the opposite of that. Well, you can go out at 9 p.m. alone, a woman, and you know,
not be attacked on every street corner.
Yeah, it's just safe. So
which
that's
I think
important.
That's probably sounds shocking to people in some, you know, large American and Canadian cities. I don't know to what extent it's bad in Europe. I mean, I'm not sure if large European cities are, whether they've become more degrading.
Yeah, well, large cities like Paris, you know, we were going around in Paris, no problem, no issues, but you know, it's not the most fantastic experience. You know, you see things that maybe you feel unsafe. I would feel unsafe because I'm Brazilian and somewhere else. So already paranoid and in a place that I don't know where is safe or not. But in general, Paris was okay. It smells weird, but the safety seemed. I'm talking about 8 years ago. Okay.
Right.
Rome looks very safe. I've been there a couple of times already. Seems safe. Well, Geneva
Rome
was
is
very
beautiful,
safe.
but I haven't been there recently, so I have no. And you know, the one and only time I was there, I was with a lot of people, so I don't know how it would be for like a lone tourist, right, exploring the city, whether that would be the case or not. But I would say, just my impression is that North American cities are, at least feel, less safe. I don't necessarily think that some of them are statistically less safe, but definitely the feeling is there because of lots of sketchy stuff happening, you know, even many years back. So yeah, I think that's another, it is an important factor, sort of this basic daily functioning, right? For someone who lives in, you know, something like the city like Minsk or Mogilov, for instance, right? You want to be able to function normally without having to be overly concerned, right? Like you're saying, paranoid about your safety too. So it's interesting that foreigners would have this impression of it. But is it really kind of perceived as a closed off country, and as far as being able to visit, as far as being able to just go?
Well, that I wouldn't know how to say. Well, before all that, before the SMO and all that, I don't think there was even, you know, concerns about going to Belarus. It was just, okay, go. If you want, go. I have never been because I have never had anything to do there. You know,
of
work
course.
And it was not of, let me try to put it in no rude way, okay? It's not that I don't care, but I didn't know anything about it. You know, it's not the type of country
I just think,
that
again,
you see
going back to
on television.
this concept of, you know, like the last dictator of Europe, I think it's very indicative of a lot of things, right? Well, first of all, Belarus is in Europe, but Russia is not in Europe, right? And I don't consider Russia to be European, right? It's a Eurasian country. It's a mix of both. But there's definitely significant European influence on Russia. You can't deny it. More European influence than Asian influence, right? And of course, its own sort of authentic Russian culture too. But yeah, it's interesting when you say that Lukashenko, not you, the powers that be, is the last dictator of Europe, that you're automatically not even considering Russia because, you know, they call Putin a dictator too, but they're not calling him the last dictator of Europe. He is just this other, you know, derogatorily pseudo-Asian country somewhere over there that's huge, but really has not much to do with us. So that's really interesting. But also that go ahead.
Maybe saying that, I would say that perhaps they are using this kind of narrative or rhetoric to, you know, tell the Belarusians that, you know, you're Europeans. You can
Yes.
be free from those Asian Ruskies.
Right.
Something like that, you know? That also, oh, you just have to take down your last dictator of
The
Europe.
last dictator.
And
Yeah,
then
go with our
you're
girl.
welcome.
Go with our girl, our self-proclaimed opposition government in exile somewhere between
Yeah.
Poland and the small Baltic states. Yeah, it's just kind of amazing. Yeah, but she really, she really fits that, like you said, the female Guaido, right? But she fits it not just in terms of being the sort of self-proclaimed, but with this NGO backing leader, quote unquote, but she fits the other parameters, right? She's quite young. When she started, she was like in her late 30s. She's in her early 40s. She's very marketable. She's not as beautiful as some of these middle manager females in the European Union itself, for instance, or as let's say, as much as I can't stand King Justin in my beloved Canada, but he is considered to be aesthetically pleasing. So she's kind of not at that level, but she's definitely within that age group, kind of youngish, marketable, right? She doesn't look like her. Maybe it's the haircut, but she reminds me of 360 Annalena for some reason. I kind of think of them as like the same person, even though they're in totally different countries. 360 Annalena and Soviet Svetlana, as you said, Svetlana sounds Soviet, which I don't want to insult the name. It's a beautiful name. Svet, Svet means light. But yeah, she's Soviet Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, which is, it's kind of a funny name to use for a pro-Western opposition leader to have such a Soviet name.
Just like Juan. Who doesn't want to be Juan in Latin America?
Of course. So yeah, it's really, she's definitely marketable from that perspective. If you kind of look at how she presents herself, right? And she, and of course, as this very typical puppet of the official West, she's supported all the things that they've supported. Like, we need to sanction everyone in Belarus, which is like, just the idea of sanctioning your own country just blows my mind, that you would be, you may be making statements like, my country's authoritarian, we need more freedom. That's fine, I suppose. Declaring yourself a government outside in exile is a little bit bizarre, but okay. But when you're now asking Western government to sanction your country, and sanctions hurt regular people, they don't necessarily hurt the government, and you can look at sanctions, the history of sanctions, whether it's Cuba or any other country that's been under sanctions for a long time, not like Russia that's been under 13 packages of sanctions and the thousands now, but it's been a shorter period, right? It's been since Crimea. But if you look at the history of sanctions, usually they hurt ordinary people the most, right? The proverbial man in the street. So the fact that this person would be going out there and urging these European leaders to sanction her country, I don't know. Like, do you really want to, are you really a good representative of your people that you claim to be, when you want to hurt your people that this is what's going to happen because there's this track record? I don't know. It's just really, it really says a lot.
It's just too obvious when you start to look at things, and I want to say this here in this show. I say this several times in our channel, that the average Joe, it has a lot of things to take care of. It has the family, it has the friends, it has some quality time, has the work, has the bills, has the car.
In some countries you work 35 hours a week. In other countries, to survive, you have to work 60, right? So yeah, there's a lot to consider.
But even like that, even if you just had to work 35 hours a week or less. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was talking to my Chinese friend once, and I was asking her, I was trying to understand a little bit of the Chinese politics. And, her answer was very interesting for me. She was like, I don't care. Most of my friends, we don't care. I'm from the Communist Party because it's the big party of the country. Most of the, I think it's 80 million people are registered on the party. Doesn't mean they work for the party. They are just registered. She said, look, When I was young, my mother was making my own clothes because we didn't have money for that. When I had the conversation with Li Jingjing, she said, when I was young, she said that. You can see on the channel, the interview.
Yeah, no, I believe you because...
No, I'm talking to people that are watching
people that are tuning in, yes.
So she said that I was a malnutritioned children. And 30 years later, China is the biggest economy.
Yes.
Is the biggest industrial power. It's a huge country, 1.4 billion people, which, by the way, 800,000 were removed from misery in the last couple of decades.
Yes, so, and we go back to our people voting for Putin and Lukashenko because they think they're the best thing, since sliced cheese, which, by the way, sliced cheese is not the best thing, but it's a very sort of North American perception, that expression. Yeah. But or are they voting for the status quo, right? Did Putin pull Russia from the abyss of the 1990s? Yes, he did. This is what people are voting for. This is what they're supporting. Did Belarus also have its own state of collapse, much like the rest of the Soviet Union? Yes, it did. So is life better now in Belarus than it was in the 90s? Yes, it is. So when you, like you're saying, most people are concerned with their daily life, with their ability to put food on the table, with their ability to be able to have a little bit of leisure time away from work, et cetera, et cetera. This is what they're concerned about, right? They're not thinking about the ideals of rainbow democracy somewhere, right? And
freedom.
These so-called universal values like European community of values, and no one can ever say what that actually means. It's just this really vague terms. You can sort of reposition the words in a sentence, change the syntax. It's going to sound the same and no one knows what it means. Yeah, they're probably not thinking about that. They're thinking about their daily life, much like people who are losing interest, let's say in Europe, they're losing interest in Ukraine because their economic position has declined. And it is very cynical to think about money and food when people are dying, and at the front. But at the same time, people are going to be more concerned about their immediate surroundings. And when they see that their life is getting worse, that's what they're going to be thinking about, right? So it's human nature, right? So if people in Belarus and Russia see that their life has dramatically improved, and that it's safe, and that there's work, and that they can travel and they can put food on the table, they're probably going to want to maintain that status quo, whether it's Putin or Uncle Sasha or an alien from planet Cookie, So it's just like this is what it's going to be.
Definitely is not going to be the outsider that wants to slave your people.
It's not going to be Miss Soviet Svetlana who wants to sanction you and hurt you, the average person in working in Minsk. It's not, because, and so sometimes when you look at, the stolen election of 2020 and you see some attribute her really high numbers in that election, I don't believe it. I do not believe that this person that had that kind of motivation and also seems very opportunistic, right? Comes out of nowhere and all of a sudden she's getting all this publicity, had no connection to anything, that people are going to vote for her in droves. Yeah, there might be some Western liberal percentage of, younger people going out. Yeah, there might be even these, I don't even think these ethno-nationalists vote, but they might be, looking at her in like kind of a marriage of convenience of, we're going to push out this sort of more I hate to use the term pro-Slavic, but let's say pro-Eurasian, right? Leader Lukashenko, we want to install our own ethno-nationalist government in Belarus. We're going to persecute everyone who's not speaking our language, et cetera, like much like Ukraine. Yeah, maybe some of them did, but I just cannot believe that it was like a large chunk of the population that would have supported her. It's just not believable to me. I don't even have to see the statistics. This is my opinion. People may disagree with it, but it's just not believable when someone who clearly wants to cause harm and completely overthrow what they have, that's just not reasonable.
Yeah, and as we saw in the other program about Navalny, as the dude with the chick's name say.
Well, I've now noticed that a lot of them say Navalny instead of Navalny, like they're just missing a letter. I guess it's just difficult to pronounce, but yeah, it sounds to me it sounds really funny. Someone
posted on Twitter that in some university it was they mixed the letters, so it was like
Navalny.
Vanalny or something.
Oh, yeah, no, in Russian there is like, if you rearrange the letters, it sounds like anal. So,
Okay. So I think
yeah,
maybe
some people
someone
have nicknamed him, some people had nicknamed him that too. So, yeah, it's.
But it was in a Western university.
Yeah, it wasn't a Western university. Yeah, there's definitely, yeah, that's definitely there too. But
Yeah, and one thing that I found very interesting here in this Euronews piece was exactly that they were mentioning that Svetlana was...
Soviet Svetlana. I never want to call her anything other than Soviet Svetlana now. She looks like, if you were to restyle what she looks like, you could totally make her look like as this party official from like the 1980s or some 1970s. Like you could restyle her, she's gonna look like this, like hardcore.
Like
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And the thing that they mention here is that only candidates belonging to the 4 officially registered parties that are loyal to the country's authority leaders, President Alexander Lukashenko, were allowed to compete in the polls. Well, who else would be allowed? It's written here, the 4 official registered.
So as opposed to like unregistered parties, I don't even understand what that means.
I don't even understand what this,
But it's interesting. Are they putting, actually, did they put Lukashenko with like an A in the end? Or with an O?
No, I'm saying that.
Lukashenko. No, because when you transcribe it in kind of a more Belarusian way, it would be ending with an A. So I was kind of curious whether they're trying to push this whole Belarusian linguistic transcription, much like they did with Kiev versus Kiev, right, with a Y, which, yeah, so I was just kind of curious whether they're pushing this. They definitely do it for Soviet Svetlana. They spell her name in what looks like unpronounceable, like a slew of vowels that a person unfamiliar with that language would not know how to say, just to not make it sound Russian.
Sviatlana. It's written here, Sviatlana.
Yeah, they definitely transcribe her name in this. Yeah, they definitely transcribe her name in Belarusian to make it sort of un-Russian, we don't want it to sound Russian in any shape or form. We don't want it to pronounce in this way, much like they did with all the transliterations of Volodymyr, of all the news from Ukraine. Yeah. So I was curious whether with Lukashenko, I guess they left him with an O, right? So he doesn't get to have the Belarusian transcription, but she does. That's hilarious.
It was fun when with the interview the Putin with Tucker Carlson, when he mentioned he's talking to Volodymyr Zelensky, and he said that they look at him and say, "Volodya, what are you doing?" Like, like a father petting Volodya.
Which is kind of like the age difference there, right? Yeah. No, I'm always thinking about that as like bringing your kid to the principal's office because he's misbehaving, and Putin is this hardcore principal, or, Lukashenko could be, Uncle Sasha can be the principal right in the school. And then there is this little misbehaving son. But yeah, actually, going back to, it's a little bit more complicated if you look at Belarus in international relations as far as Russia goes. I think we haven't actually mentioned that. On the one hand, yes, it's probably true that Putin may have saved him, right, in the 2020 protests. But at the same time, first of all, Lukashenko stepped in shortly after the overthrow in 2014 in Ukraine and the war in Donbass. Kiev launched the war against Donbass, against its own people. And Lukashenko tried to de-escalate. He had meetings with the then Poroshenko. They all end with an O. He had meetings with Putin and the then president Poroshenko that was, going after technically his own people in these breakaway republics. And, civilians were dying in, mass numbers. And Lukashenko tried to intervene. I mean, it didn't really go any farther than the failed Minsk agreements, right? That was sort of the next step. So there was definitely that attempt as I'm going to be the mediator between the two. And then, of course, we can go to the more recent, last summer with Prigozhin's coup d'etat, right? The musicians. He was also sort of this force that intervened. I mean, to what extent that was real or orchestrated, I mean, I have no idea. We can all put on our tinfoil hats and come up with various theories, but at least on the surface, it looked like he was sort of this middleman that tried to de-escalate the situation, right, between the musicians and sort of the Russian government, and he succeeded, right? So a lot of these musicians went to Belarus, right, and by now, it looks like the musicians have been reintegrated, for better or for worse, into the official Russian armed forces, rather being a separate sort of this mercenary entity, which of course, it was separate in terms of, in some ways, but of course it was getting a lot of their information from the Ministry of Defense. You can't have a war with a completely separate entity without having that information. So of course there was some level of oversight. So, there's lots can be said about that. But yeah, it was very interesting that he stepped in with the initial crisis in Ukraine, which kind of tells me that he could foresee where this would go.
Yeah, well, when I look at this, what comes to my mind is the following. So the Putin it's
I love that you call him the Putin.
Putin. That was the Volodya Zelensky that started with this, right?
Yes, I know. It's because we don't have articles. I mean, some other languages don't have articles either, like the Lola, like in French, or and the in English, right? Or the 3 German articles that then have to decline with the nouns, right? So we don't have those. So I think Slavs a lot of times confuse when to use the and when not to use. So sometimes you have people who just completely omit them altogether. And other times you have people that would be referring to like the name of someone, which doesn't work. But yeah, the Putin. Okay, I didn't realize it was our friend Z. Elensky that
exactly. That so he started calling him the Putin. So he's not just
as
Putin,
opposed to all the other Putins,
Putin.
all the Putin doubles running around, right?
Exactly. He's the big Putin.
Which Putin are you today? Are you the skier Putin? Are you the diver Putin? Are you the spaceman Putin? Are you the KGB Putin? Which one are you today? What's your mood, right?
Today,
the Putin. I'm the Putin. The Putin.
Yeah, so the Putin, he has a very strong image, and he also needs to keep that very strong image. So I don't think he would be. So what I mean is probably Lukashenko comes in as a middleman because first of all he's not directly involved. So he's an outsider. His image is not going to be framed as weak or strong, or it doesn't matter. At the same time, that the Putin can be just demoted to just Putin if he, talk to Wagner or to negotiate, the negotiation.
Which, of course,
Wagner
afterwards he did, right? He did have that meeting after things were de-escalated.
Exactly. But at that moment, that would be a weakness. That would be a sign of weakness. Well, no. I'm okay. Oh, let's, negotiate. What do you want? No. Call our friend Lukashenko. Lukashenko, remember that time in 2020 where I saved your ass?
Remember when I saved your ass? From Soviet Svetlana, I saved your ass from Soviet Svetlana. Look what happened. She was trying to chase you, and you owe me.
So yeah, it looks to me as in a diplomatic sphere, it looks like there's an orchestration there just to keep the balance of powers, and at the same time try to do the easier or the best, let's say the best we can get from it without major crisis. Here,
well, at least on the surface, like regardless of what went on behind the scenes, at least the public perception of Lukashenko, I would say in both situations, whether in 2015-ish, right, when he tried to de-escalate the war in Donbass and he tried to speak, with Poroshenko, the former Ukrainian president, or this, coup or pseudo-coup, whatever you want to call it, attempt with the musicians, he does come across looking very positive, right? He does come across looking like this mediator, but at the same time, this kind of like strong man mediator who is sort of like drinking on the phone probably when he's talking to you and he's having his negotiation, like, come on, dude, and very kind of like paternalistic and formal, right? He's like, he's the dad, although, Possibly, right? So he does, I feel like in those situations, he does have, in my opinion, a very positive public image, which I don't think would be really the sort of the Western media would never admit this. And I don't even remember if they've covered that Ukrainian attempt at the Ukrainian de-escalation in the first place, because Minsk was sort of the bigger fish to fry, right? But the Minsk agreements, which of course are also called Minsk agreements because of speaking of, right, because of Belarus, right? So even though he was not this guarantor, he did facilitate by giving this platform, right, in Minsk. So that's another thing that's, I think it's worth noting, that he does participate in these kind of more foreign policy type situations. And, you know, I think from my perception, being the self-proclaimed Empress of Eurasia in exile, I think he has he comes across looking very, very, very good. So.
Yeah, so I don't have any. Oh yeah, well, so I made a note just about one of the articles. It was so two things that came very interestingly to my eyes was that so this is a quote from this article saying the anti-Russians were not against repression while it was against their opponents. When it comes to when the oppression came to them, then it was a human right violation.
Of course,
it's the usual, story, and that I'm talking to the Brazilian people that watch this video. Of course, remember this. And the other one was the last sentence was so don't dig a hole for us for someone else. When you can, walk through that and you fall on the hole yourself. And that was also, we aborted this today on this Rumble video that we said about Rumble leaving Brazil. That is exactly about the Supreme Court of Brazil. They are just doing things, like the Trump cases now, more or less, but with a minor scale. They are not going after, they are going out after, YouTubers or digital influencers that were in Rumble, some very particular ones. And many people see these as you have to censor these guys. You have to censor these guys, and it can be you,
right? This expression about digging a hole and falling into it yourself, like it's a famous Russian expression, but I'm pretty sure other languages have something similar. I need some caffeine to recall what the English counterpart would be. I'm pretty sure there is one. But yeah, that was an interesting, definitely a relevant way to sum it up. But I think the other article I sent you was about Lukashenko saying that I'm so happy we avoided the Ukraine scenario, right? He seems to be very, at least again, if you judge his public statements, he seems to be very keenly aware of what could have happened if this sort of marriage of convenience between these NGO-backed pro-Western liberals, who are not very liberal, right, and these ethno-nationalists, if they had succeeded, what kind of a situation could have unfolded in Belarus. Obviously, also on Russian borders, doesn't benefit Russia in any shape or form, right? Having more chaos, also having, that large Russian-speaking population there. So again, many parallels there. So he seems to be having flirted with these ethno-nationalists, which, I don't think he'll admit. He seems to be really aware that it's not really, it was not something that was going to work out in his favor. And again, going back to what Ukraine is today, I think hopefully the people of Belarus can see what they've avoided, and this is why they vote the way they vote, right? For better or for worse. Well, this
was not a presidential election, this one, but parliamentary elections, it's a good thermometer for the people's feeling.
But also, if you look at the coverage in the Western media, they're talking about this being the first election since the protests, right? So they're also framing it in that way, that we had these massive protests, the election with Lukashenko was falsified, blah, 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 and this is the first election, and look, they're not allowing as many, it's a sham, they're not allowing as many foreign observers, although there are foreign observers from other countries. So yeah, it's definitely, like you're saying, it's a good barometer of social mood. And I think having I would say even before the 2022 escalation, I would say the Maidan situation itself kind of acted as, maybe not for these ethno-nationalists that have similar goals to the Ukrainian counterparts, but definitely for ordinary people, that was kind of a serious vaccination, inoculation, right, against having these protests that can end very, very badly because of that foreign interference with NGOs and so on and so forth. So I think they're keenly aware of that, and also obviously they're like right on the border, so they realize what could happen because they're physically present there. They're not sort of half the world away talking about whether tax money should or shouldn't go there, right? They're right there. So yeah. And they're, they've been sanctioned because Lukashenko allowed sort of Belarusian territory to be used by Russia as part of the Union State, right? So,
is it in the law, or he just took it out of his hand?
But it's like, does it matter to the BBC, for instance, what is in or what isn't in the law, right? Does it matter? No, of course it doesn't matter.
Then I have to pull Lukashenko's own words. Who cares about what BBC and Western countries thinks about Belarus?
Right, exactly.
Only the Belarusians can say what they think about Belarus.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I just I don't think that sort of that danger of having those subversive elements is completely gone. I think it's definitely something that can always be sort of pulled up from the depths because they're sort of present everywhere, and hopefully Lukashenko, much like Putin, hopefully they have some kind of a legitimate successor. And personally, I don't care if people see it as a kind of like a dynasty that's not related by blood, right? Actually, a lot of people always talk about Lukashenko's son as being the successor. But yeah, hopefully there's another, my opinion, another strong man that can come into power, because Lukashenko's been around for a while, and hopefully they can sort of maintain similar policies by avoiding the hostile influences coming from the outside, or alternatively, those hostile influences can hopefully change for the better and sort of embrace the spirit of cooperation that China is trying to foster around the world. And maybe the European Union at some point can be a little bit more independent as individual European countries or as a single entity, and it can cooperate with Russia and Belarus for a change for its own benefit, rather than
as
trying
it has been doing for the last that many years, and everything's been working just fine.
Well, again, we go back to the same idea. We're sort of we as in they are on the same continent. They share the same continent. They're very close to each other in terms of geographic proximity. Geography in certain ways defines international relations, geopolitics, et cetera, et cetera. So you're sort of stuck together, right? You don't really choose your neighbors, and you're going to have to work together sooner or later. So if, it would be nice if the EU jumped on board of this European integration, because it would benefit it, rather than not using Russian energy, or not, perhaps taking imports from Belarus or whatever. I'm just speaking hypothetically, but perhaps there is a better future ahead. But yes, to conclude, Uncle Sasha is pretty badass. He has made some mistakes. He has his flirtation with these ethno-nationalists was definitely one of the mistakes. And hopefully I'm going to get on this article and just write a little thing maybe covering this particular feature that I can't find in the English language as far as that ethno-nationalist sort of underground is concerned. And hopefully you'll see it earlier than the next 6 months because of how busy I've been. Yes.
Well, as long as we see it before the next election, that would be fine.
Yeah, that's the most important part, right before the next election. before the next appearance by Soviet Svetlana in some Western media outlet, Soviet Svetlana.
Excellent.
I hope hopefully someone takes my invitation and photoshops her or just uses AI asking her to restyle her as like a Soviet party, Communist Party functionary. I would just love to see that because she looks exactly like that. So.
Yeah, I tried to find some GIF or video, you know, some Hollywood movies where there's always this Russian woman, long black hair, you know, I'm a Svetlana.
No, but those women,
like
they make look them alluring. I mean, like more of like this hard ass. In Russian, we have the expression thunder woman, like a thunder woman. Because she looks like she would be that kind of a woman, at least, you know, like in terms of physical appearance. So it'd be really hilarious to restyle her as this old school communist, and she probably would find it insulting, which would make it even more
more funnier.
To me, it would be funnier because, lady, you can't sanction your own people. That makes you a jerk. So yeah, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that was the perfect end sentence. So everybody, remember that every Thursday we are here with the Winter Latina Show, 7 p.m. at Italy time, 3 p.m. at Brazil time, and 11 a.m. for you.
Well,
right?
it's 1 p.m. It's 1 p.m. Eastern. I think that's the time that makes most sense for North Americans because it's like New York, Toronto time zone. And of course, in the next 2 weeks, we'll be coming to you from the past, you people of the future, because we have some recorded episodes for you, because I know you will be missing us and crying on the inside and possibly on the outside, because, you know, how can you live without your favorite Empress of Eurasia in exile and your favorite, I'm not going to call you tech genius because you get offended, superstitious tech genius as someone called you. Yes.
See, you didn't say it, all worked.
Hopefully, I'll go back and I'll check. Yeah, a tech non-genius, a tech
idiot.
I don't know.
Mediocre.
A tech idiot is like an amazing. Tech idiot is an amazing moniker, actually. Yeah, so we'll be coming to you from the past, you people of the future, because I know you'll miss us. We have some very interesting. Sort of quasi-historic episodes that I think you would find interesting, and then we'll be back when our tech idiot. I'm only using your own. I'm not actually trying to insult you. When you're back from sipping wine, making us all jealous with the beaches of Southern Europe, and then we'll be back, actually just in time, almost in time for the Russian elections. Which would be a really, that's another biggie.
Which we also pre-recorded because
we pre-recorded it because we know what's going to happen. We got a phone call from...
we got a phone call from the Putin.
From the Putin. You got a phone call. I never get phone calls from the Putin. By the way, I'm joking. I don't actually get phone calls from the Putin because I wouldn't be where I am. It's not
because he blocked me on social media.
He blocked me on socials. When I said he's not much of a hard ass and he's too soft, then he blocked me on socials. I can't believe it. Yeah.
See,
so guys, thank you for...
You're always saying good things about Uncle Sasha that Putin didn't like.
I know. He got jealous that I'm saying good things about Uncle Sasha, and I'm saying that Putin is not. He needs to be more hardcore, criticizing him from the other side of Western liberals. And he just blocked us all on socials. But hopefully he'll have a change of heart, and he sent it to the social gulag. You know, I had to insert that in there. All right, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you have some opinions about Uncle Sasha and just, you know, that attempt at the, you know, what I perceive as a color revolution in Belarus. And we will see you next week.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you think we did some mistakes here, please leave a comment.
Or Uncle Sasha will come after you.
The Baba Yaga.
Yeah, Baba Yaga. Yeah.
See you guys next week. Bye-bye.